Steve, would you mind just saying something so we can check
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. That's
Can you
good.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Ooh, good. Okay.
Um, Christine, we've lost your video.
Pardon?
Can hear you, but not see you.
Oh, okay.
We did have you, and then you disappeared.
Is that okay? Okay.
Yeah, that's perfect. Great. Okay, we've got you back.
Okay.
Okay, everybody. We are about to start this afternoon session. And this is the day this morning, but we have 4 people who are joining parts of the conference where they're all together from overseas. And one of those delegates is going to be the person who is going to introduce the next speaker, and this is Christine Matthews from the University of Regina. Thank you, Christine.
Okay. Can everyone hear me? You can hear me?
Yes.
It is my great pleasure. Okay. It is my great pleasure to introduce Professor George Sefa Dei. Born in Ghana, Professor Dei is a renowned educator, researcher, and writer who is one of Canada's foremost scholars on race and anti-racism studies. He is a widely sought-after academic, researcher, and community worker whose professional and academic work has led to many Canadian and international speaking invitations. Currently, he is Professor of Social Justice Education and Director of the Centre for Integrative Anti-Racism Studies at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. Dave's research interests are in the area of anti-racism, minority schooling, international development, anti-colonial thought, and Indigenous knowledge systems. He has 28 books and over 160 refereed journal and book articles and book chapters to his credit. Professor Dei has been awarded many honors. Most recently, he is the 2015-2016 Carnegie Africa Diasporan Fellow. He was voted by a Canadian newspaper organization as being among the top influential Black scholars and community workers in Canada, and he has just received the 2016 Whitworth Award for Educational Research from the Canadian Education Association, awarded to the scholar whose research and scholarship have helped shape Canadian national educational policy and practice. Also in 2007, Professor Dei was installed as the traditional chief in Ghana. The title of his talk today is Decolonizing Education for Inclusivity, Implications for Literacy Education. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Professor George Sefa Dei.
Thanks, Christine. Actually, I told her I'll take it nice. She said nice as well. I just want to begin by recognizing the space in which we are alive. Vanessa did that. think it's so important for us to recognize that because it has give us the ground in which we do our work. And let us also remember in some parts of our world, people have to struggle to create spaces in which to speak, to dialogue on issues. So very important. I also want to thank Fatima and Deborah for inviting me today. And actually, this is time for me to meet her. On this side, we have this Roosevelt area in my views and so this is very, very important for me. I want to begin by sharing a story. This actually happened, but I want to present it as a story. About a week ago, I was coming from my house in Toronto to school, and you know how on the street you meet people who are asking for money. So this guy sees me and says he has a cup in his hand, and he's one of those people on the street. So he says, "I'm taking up a collection, and then it's for trying to get rid of Donald Trump." And then he do something especially for you. So he's taking up a collection to move Donald Trump, especially for people like me. Right? And I think to me this is so powerful. Right? Let's speak about how bodies are read, how bodies are taken up in our institutions. And these are things that I want to share with you and talk to you about and dialogue with you. I come to this discussion as a sociologist, somebody who's trained both in the questioning traditions of the discipline, but also the way we also envision the futuristic component of the discipline. So I'm going to be critical, but I also want to look forward in terms of issues. And for somebody who is teaching in Canada, which I'm sure some of the issues reflect here, I see the paradox of sometimes the contradiction, where Canada is seen as one of the most educated nations in the world, and yet indigenous and black people in Africa, in Canada, continue to struggle for benefit of justice and everything. I think that is a paradox that we need to be. We are all educators, we are all teachers, and we know the same. Once we are ready, the student appears. So we have to be ready, both pedagogically and also in terms of the business that we use in that. My area has been how we think, not so much recent way, how we think about the creation of new global educational features. And there's a reason why we need to think about this question, but let's look at what feature are we looking at? Currently, what feature are we looking at? And this is why we put up our struggles, we put up our tools and our responses to address the feature that we want to talk about. And I think to me, how we co-produce knowledge in our communities is very, very important. How we co-produce knowledge in our communities. But also how we begin to reimagine what some have called the new geographies of knowledge, which work with our different ontologies and our different epistemologies in a way to come out with new visions of schooling and education for everyone. I think that is so important. And I'm also someone who is also propelled by the idea that we need to create what some of us have called the spiritually centered learning spaces for the healing that Vanessa was talking about to happen. There's so much injury that we need to create those spaces for that to happen. And in one recent piece I called that the planetic space. But I know people like Valeria Shelley talk about it in terms of that social centered learning spaces and how that is so important for us to be able to deal with that. I want to share some practical words of wisdom. And this is a quote from one of my doctoral students, Margaret Bacon, where in one of the classes I teach on Fanon in the anthropological theories. And she wrote a paper for me, which says, quote, it's not important that everyone agrees with Fanon. So it's not important that you agree with me, with Vanessa, with Fran, or with Fatima, right? It is important, though, that our work gives us the pedagogical foundation on which to interrogate, to decolonize, to reconstruct ourselves, our beliefs, and particularly our supposed normalities. But there's so many things to take for granted. We construct them as normal. I think we how we pedagogically intervene and to interrupt this. A long time ago in 1996, one of my words I said, any community is as good as we collectively work together. That means we have the collective responsibility if you want to change, if you want to create new visions in the future. It's a collective responsibility. It's not us in the head, it's us. And how we work with that. And I think to me, I want to work with a productive theory of anger, a productive theory of anger. And there's a reason for that. We all get this sensation of moving fast and stuff. Sometimes there's a complacency that we've gone the additional by when actually they are still standing. So we need to have that relative fear of that. Because it's that which will compel them to change. There's so much complacency. We are so seduced by the movement that we see around us. So actually, it's no movement. We are still standing still. To engage that. I want to share some long-standing issues in student education. This comes from where I'm located, in the airport, and I'm sure you do make some connections. One has to do with the systemic challenges and the particular impact on indigenous, racialized, and other marginalized students in their success. So I'm here talking about things we all know, the absence of representation, whether in knowledge or the bodies themselves, but also the ongoing negations and the silences around the deep curriculum. What constitutes the deep curriculum? What are they? Who is absent? Who is misrepresented? Who is negated? Who is experiencing negations and negated in that? But we also have to deal with this problem of youth disengagement, or what I call, a long time ago I also used the word push out. Right? We need to look at the push out. The push out is not simply that we have educators who are bad, who think, I get up in the morning, I'm going to be bad. No educator says that. Right? But what we do and what we don't do, how we do it, right? Maybe some students find themselves outside the school. And that is the process of pushing out. It's the process of which life. But also the silence and some extent the salience of things of race and indigeneity. I'm talking about the systemic racism that's affects our schooling system, issues around anti-blackness, anti-indigeneity, Islamophobia, right? And how certain bodies are treated differently, and also what we have to do with in terms of the ongoing legacies of colonialism and the creation of the settler community. But also what I call the discursive manipulations or the intellectual gymnastics. So schools will take credit for success, but when there's a problem, we look at the homes and we blame the families, in particular the communities. Now, if you are prepared to take credit for success, we must be prepared to accept responsibility for the failures and not look for the homes and the families. Right? As educators, when our students do well, we must be proud of that. But if we are facing challenges, we also have to see our responsibilities and not pathologize the home. And then we have to interrupt the dominant conceptions of success and how we still work with the cultural deficit models of schooling that will lack something and we want to make it out. Rather than look at the strengths, the agency that we bring to the schooling system to work with. And of course, the new liberalism and this educational agenda, where there's a deliberate deployment of these notions around reform, standards, accountability, excellence, competencies, quality, human capital. I think to me, there's a deliberate deployment. It's not that these countries or these concepts are not important, but it's how they're being deployed. They're being deployed in particular places and particular lens. We need to trouble that. But also the whole concept of, or the whole idea of schooling being a global capitalist modernity, as schooling within that global capitalist modernity, which is about displaying bodies and knowledge. Well, you know excellence if it looks like you. If George looks like you, George is excellent. If George is different, it's not. Right? So that display of bodies and the knowledge is education that serves individualized, private and corporate, and as well as market interests. And also how the dialectic, and with some of this right about, how the dialectic of coloniality and modernity have worked to ensure the epistemic hegemony of Western science knowledge. And for the absence of multi-centricity, multiple ways of knowing, because the multi-epistates and how these are very, very absent in our schools. And then the seductive liberal notion of inclusion. Right? You can be included while it still exists on the margins. You can be included when it still exists on the margins. We need to actually interrupt or interrogate what it means to include. And that to me means to bring emphasization to what we mean when we talk about difference. And to move away from what Kevin talks about the standardization recipes. Right? Or what the books a lot of time talks about is that thinking around sameness is a provocation that theorizes. It's not the idea of one size fits all. It's sameness, and that becomes a provocation that theorizes many of us. So we need to ask some new questions. And one of the questions I wanted to think about is how do we frame an inclusive and anti-colonial global future? Excuse me. So how do we frame this future, and what is the nature of work that is required to collectively arrive at that future? How do we see our responsibilities in that? What sort of education should be taking place in our schools today? And what are we going to do with that education, whether we are learners or even we are educators ourselves? And then how, excuse me, how do we refashion our roles, whether we are educators, learners, or administrators, or even community workers, to create more relevant understandings of what it means to be human? I remember posting this question, oh, so it means now we are not human again. No, it's more than that. I'm talking about the questions of reciprocity, the questions of sharing, the mutual interdependence. If your kid is doing well and my kid is not doing well, it is our problem. It's not their problem. And that's being human. That sense of reciprocity sharing in that context. Also, how do we equip ourselves multiple lenses of critical inquiry, which we, as critical educators, we have to think about. And the idea that no one tells the full story. Right? Earlier we heard about the story of stories. But there are multiple stories. Like, how do we tell these multiple stories in order to come to a complete understanding of our world? The problem is that some of us even don't get to tell our stories. Our stories are negated, they are dismissed, they are delegitimized. So we need to create a space where we need to tell those multiple stories. And how do we bring a humility to our knowing? That no one knows it all. I think one of the things that I discussed with my students, the first student, when you come into a space and you are humble, you always leave that space knowing more. And that humility is so important. When we bring that arrogance to our intellectual work, to our personal work, we are very limited at that. So that's so important in that. What discussing positions do I take in my address, in my paper? I think to me, the idea that our anti-colonial or our decolonial intellectuality, right, must consider the body of the knowledge producer. Who is speaking and who is saying what, how, and why? It's not very important. Who is speaking, who is saying what, and how? What is the place that this conversation is taking place? What are our desires and what are our politics, and how do we bring that into our work? And what is the context in which we are producing that knowledge? I think this is very, very important. Secondly, also to recognize that decolonization cannot happen solely through Western science scholarship. Decolonization cannot happen solely through Western. That doesn't mean that's so important. It is. But it is part of the problem. Western science scholarship is part of the problem. So decolonization cannot happen solely through that. And then thirdly, to take up justice education in a very critical way, which is to say we bring questions of social justice, indigeneity, we center questions of decolonial process, because they are very, very key to achieving academic and social success. Not just academic, but academic and social success. Because you and I know that sometimes we have students who are very good. They get A class on the test scores. But when it comes to human relations, they are very lousy. So academic success cannot just be academic. It has to be academic and social to be able to deal with that. And I think to me that's very important. What I do in the paper also is we can't have this conversation without interrogating the global. What gets reconstructed as the global. So we begin with a critique of the global problems, something that most of us here know. And then I think to me there's an emerging what has been called transnationally organized global problem, which is very critical with ways globalization has intensified global economic inequities. For example, the rising poverty is one thing, and then also the idea that there are differential benefits with this so-called globalization that in which we are well. Then secondly, to pursue the problematic of pursuing what is seen as the rise of global capital. An example of that would be the hegemony of the markets and how it plays out in our school system. Issues about deregulation, competition, dualism, privatization, and a very restrictive definition of what constitutes education, which is basically to serve corporate market interests. And we need to interrupt that. So how do we interrogate that? I think we need to look at the specific impacts on schooling and schooling implications. What is the whole idea of education for global diversity? Questions of social difference and what it means for education and delivery. So teaching, learning, and administration of education. And also the cultural politics of schooling. Secondly, the whole challenge, the whole possibility as well of navigating culture in a new place for many of us. So people talk about the bifurcated regimes of citizenship. That it seems in some cases there are certain citizens who have rights and others are seen as be governed. They need to be regulated, they need to be regimented, right? And we need to look at that application. Then the struggles for inclusive citizenship, the struggles to be included in a way that is very, very profound, not just simply saying, well, we can tolerate you. But for an inclusive citizenship, which is about questions of having access to the valued goods and services that make for the human to be who he or she is. And of course, to also interrupt the dictates of capitalist solution. Because I think it's very, very important to talk about that and find out the problematics of that in that sense. Then there's a problem around the integration of new migrants. So dealing with issues around alienation, the devaluation of our identities, and the social exclusion and our racialized exclusions. And then what has been a long story that continues to be something that we have to deal with. People talk about in terms of the crisis around refugees, which is the challenge of racialized and gendered poverty, homelessness, displacement as non-status refugees, post-traumatic stress coming from war zones, and how discrimination has in social service affect many people's sense of belonging. And these are things that we have to deal with. We need to confront of that. Then issues about global extremism defined broadly, not just simply religious, but also defined in terms of when we talk about being defined broadly, we talk about racial bigotry, right? The ultra right. Right? There's an extremist vision that we have for our world. We need to have that in the conversation, right? But the point is that extremism is a current global concern, which is linked to terrorism of all forms, whether religious extremism or racial bigotry. And to begin to question that, how can education help us to counter forms of extremism which present a danger to society globally? And I think here some of you will be familiar with people like the Davis and others who talk about some of these things, like preventing you from joining extremist groups, enabling youth to critically analyze extremism and its consequences in that regard. What are the possibilities? When we went to do this frame of the realization, what are the possibilities? And I think the possibilities have to be thought about in terms of broadening what constitutes this being global and the global education that it entails. So global citizenship education, for example, cannot just be simply talking about interdependencies. It cannot just simply be a commitment to fundamental rights and freedoms of all peoples. It cannot just simply be acknowledgement of cultural diversity. It cannot just simply be about talking about the efficacy and the power of individual acts. It has to be more than that. It has to be more than that. And that means to begin to ask a few questions. How does global education, for example, concretely deal with power, privilege, and our relative complexities in sustaining colonial and oppressive education? We have to face facts. What we are confronted with is colonial and very oppressive. There are possibilities, there are liberating forces, but by and large, it's structured, right? And so, how do we ask questions around that? And I think there are certain questions to ask, for example, can there be any redemptive qualities of this form of education? What qualities can be, and how can they be pursued? What critical frameworks and practices are needed to disrupt asymmetrical power relations? And Dorothy, Vanessa, Luciza, and others have talked about these issues. How we begin to think differently about that global in our world. And then the whole idea of education has been perceived as a core avenue for global redistributive justice. And someone whose work is also in the House of Africa. This is so clear to me when I see, for example, how conventional discussions of democracy, good governance, and human rights are so pervasive, right, in these spaces. And they are pervasive also in the context of the power of markets, right, and which is so contradictory in terms of that, and it's able to acknowledge those things. So, what framings of literacy education to me are relevant, right? I think moving literacy education from knowing how to read and write to engaging learning as a process of sharing, reciprocity, respect, collaboration, healing, and creating sustainable relationships. Preventing literacy not as an end in itself, but also as a process in the movement of transition in life for different learners. I've written about this. Also, the whole idea of equity literacy, which is teaching about social justice, power, resistance, social responsibility, accountability, and transparency. And to know that the most effective equity literacy approach is one which is integrative, it's also multidisciplinary, and it's holistic and links academics to the practical. What good is education if it's only going to be theory? People are going to apply it in their lives, so linking the academic to the practical. And also to see racial equity literacy as a strategic instruction about saliency of indigeneity, saliency of race, saliency of blackness, and the interstices of difference. What I say that disability. This is very, very important to me from where I'm coming from. Where, for example, we have people who are in school, they're present physically, but they're absent in mind and soul. Right? Blackness, for example, right? The truth about blackness is that it is complex, it is constructed, but it's also consequential. And not only is it consequential, it can also be affected. How do we talk about those dimensions of that? The same can be applied to humanity. That it is consequential, it can be affected. But we also have to be able to talk about these things in a way that talks about like complexities. That indigenous literacy that this evokes, that it promotes indigenous and cultural knowledges and philosophical education, which are both political and they are intellectual. It cannot just be seen as also these are political, that you talk about these issues, they are also intellectual, right? That demarcation between the political and intellectual no longer holds. No longer holds. That what we do is always going to be political. Even when we are saying we are not being political, we are. Being apolitical is to be political. Because there's an interest and it's being something in that process. Now, I think it's very important to me, I think we're going to do some of these things too, from when we take the notion of decolonization to know where we're coming from. So I want to share with you some ideas from where I'm coming from with decolonization. So the whole concept, right? I think people I cannot have talked about, we talk about what can we do and so forth, right? And there are many paths to decolonization. Decolonization is about a path. Anybody who would pursue this path have to face some responses which are very, very harsh, right? And if I not talk about this, it's like a war. It's a war zone, right? But it's not an arrival, but it's a historical, ongoing process. I've never seen anybody who's decolonized. I've never met anybody who is decolonized. It's something that we continue to do. Nobody has been decolonized. But as Linda Smith says, we have to take decolonization as something which engages with multiple levels of imperialism and colonialism in that space. But also to see decolonization as not about mainstreaming practice. Look, anytime you mainstream something, it's not decolonized. Because when you mainstream it, you have to basically deal with the question of you seek legitimation and validation. And how can that decolonization is about upsetting Africa, it's by subversion. So when you mainstream it, that, it's not. Because you have to deal with questions of legitimation and validation, which are established by the dominant. Right? So to be able to deal with it. And then also to me, in my book, that decolonization is about developing that critical consciousness of oneself as a learner, oneself in terms of the place we are, the history, and the identities that we use, and also memory. But Sheikh Antidiop says it best for me when he says decolonization is quote, it's about abandoning all reflectors of subordination. And that to me is so important to abandon that role of subordination. And then there's the question of, particularly where I'm coming from again, the question of decolonization of the land. I think to me, decolonization is primarily anchored in questions of the land, whether we talk about the land concretely or metaphorically. Right? It's anchored at that. But you also have to be very, very conscious against the slippage into a very hegemonic thinking that only the non-authenticized indigenous bodies need to decolonize. Right? The colonizer and the colonized both need that decolonization. That it's a pitfall of only conceptualizing decolonization in ways that provide no space to address either the auto-destruction or the intersectionalities of struggle. That means very, very important. I think also we all know decolonization involves the psyche, cultural memories, resisting internalized colonial relations of thought and power. But also to conceptualize the land broadly, both metaphorically and also concretely. And also to recognize that many people do so in different ways. And that is very, very important for transnational and colonial politics. Just concretize what I'm trying to say here is that if you simply tie decolonization to the land and not look at it in a very complex way, right, it creates problems for people who have different relations to the land. It's for them in that context. Again, coming from the Kenyan context, I think, and I think Fatima said it in the remarks this morning, that colonialism and settler colonialism to me are intertwined. They require separate analytical distinctions. We agree with that. But they are cut from the same cloth. Right? In Ghana, there's that attempt to distinguish between colonialism and settler colonialism. Yes, at the analytical level, we must make that separation. But let us remember that colonialism and settler colonialism are cut from the same cloth. And what is that same cloth? Something that Andreas Smith talks about. Racism, slavery, and capitalism. That's we work with it. And also to understand settlement as produced through the trade processes of indigenous genocide, right, and African enslavement. To understand the way that trade processes went in some places, right? And that decolonization requires, and this sometimes is people are beginning to talk about this. I know it's very heavy for people to get their heads around it. What it requires basically is for the colonizer to cease to exist. For the colonizer to cease to exist. It's very practical, metaphorically in the sense of that. And acknowledging that the true meaning of, we appear people now by reconciliation. Right? What is the true meaning of that reconciliation? It's not just simply say, gee, that's all. It ought to be more than that. Right? And so when we from my case, when we begin to talk about reparations, they're not just simply talk about what he's saying, you're just sorry. It has to go with resources, it has to go with concretely addressing some of the material of existence. Then, of course, my view of decolonization also has to be tied to the question of transgressive pedagogies. Right? Transgressive pedagogies. For example, to recognize decolonization as a political intellectual act, we begin by secondly, that there's a particular place for indigenous epistemologies in the academy. That we need to have these epistemologies in the academy in order to threaten, to challenge, to replace and reimagine alternatives to colonial thinking and practices. And to also work with the idea that the complex problems facing our world today defy universalist solutions. That they can only be addressed through multi-centric, multiple ways of living our world. And that we begin to teach our students to understand, for example, our government students, our white students, who are mostly in our school systems, right? To understand their Euro ancestry privilege, and the power of the hegemonies. And then Vanessa talked about that. Hegemonies in all its levels, whether it's ontological, whether it's social or it's ideological. One of the axiological hegemonies is when we talk about treating everybody the same. It's the only way of using social justice. Right? That is a very problematic axiological hegemonic beauty. Right? Sometimes we see people differently because of the historical inequities that exist. That we have to work with that. So what are the implications? So what I'm talking about for teaching diversity and difference. And here I'm raising what I call five core philosophical principles and standpoints. They are very, very things that we grapple with. I just want to encapsulate what I'm thinking. One is to work with the politics of identity. I'm not talking of identity politics, but to work with the politics of identity and knowledge. Who we are, how we come to know, understand, and act within our world. They are very, very connected. Who we are, how we come to know and act within our world. They are very, very connected. Acknowledging our relative saliencies of different identities, the relative saliencies of different identities. And by that, what I mean is that yes, look, all identities are salient. Race, gender, class, sexuality, they are very, very salient. But depending on where one finds herself or himself, we have to work with this relative saliencies. So I talk about my own work when I say, but growing up in Ghana, right, of course, questions of gender and class were very salient to me. And then I moved to North America, and race becomes salient. So the relative saliencies of different identities is what I'm talking about. And you recognize the severity of issues for certain bodies. This is important, the severity of issues for certain bodies. In a time when people who have different faiths, whether it's Muslim faith, or people who have particular heritage, whether it's Arab heritage and so forth, are being scrutinized, right? We have to talk about the severity of issues. So when you tell me that all students drop out, yes, all students are pushed out, all students drop out. But dropping out is a very salient issue for certain bodies. If you're black, African, indigenous, native context, please. So that's the thing very important. Otherwise, we get into this thing, everything goes. That's context. Then cultivating the idea of communities. That how we create communities, acknowledging our differences, knowledge and sharing power is very important. And to see communities as sites and places of learning and healing, respect, reciprocity, and also communities as about sameness and differences. The issue here is about that notion about sameness. That sometimes we talk about shared experiences. Yes, when we look at the colonial experience, they are shared. Right? But it doesn't mean they are the same. And talking about shared experiences doesn't mean that we are talking about a singular experience. There are multiple layers, multiple levels of that experience. But we should be able to talk about shared experience and not see it as like it means we are talking about the same. Shared experiences are not similar. We should talk about that space. Now, as communities emerge as part of transnational mobility, right, we are confronted with broader questions, tensions, and challenges, but also possibilities. And obviously, some of this have to do with questions around migration, questions around family unification, and issues around community development in that context. Then the notion of difference. The notion of difference. This is the third philosophical contention. Yes, there's a problem of colonial difference. I think part of the colonial and average, maybe another talk about that. You construct these differences and you assign values to them, and on that basis, you subject people to differential and unequal treatment. That is colonial difference. That we need to survey that. But there's another difference that I don't want us to survey. It's about differences that sees the strengths. If I walk in here and I said I don't see the color, that's an insult. That's an insult. The problem is not the color, it's the interpretation that we put on the color. Just because George is black, it doesn't mean George is inferior. Just because Fatima is something else doesn't mean she is superior. It is the interpretation that is the problem. So to walk in there and say different, look, we need to talk about the differences, but talk about them as strengths, not as weaknesses and liabilities. When we talk about them as weaknesses and liabilities, we are talking about the first one. That's the problem of colonial difference. Right? And the third is, of course, all differences are connected, right? So the gender sexuality, which we all talk about. And the point that I think I want to make here about the injustice of difference is to bring some intellectual honesty the way we speak about the injustice. Right? Because one of the things that I've seen is that when people even claim to be taking all the differences and working with them, they drop the ball on some differences. So you may be working with gender, class, sexuality, ability, but sometimes people drop race, or people may drop gender, or people may drop sexuality. So I think let's bring intellectual honesty to the discussions of the injustice of difference. That's what I'm talking about. And of course, the power of the subaltern, and what some of us are not talking about, is sub-intern. So Spielberg talks about the subaltern. You also want to talk about the sub-intern differences. And to recognize that this is about authentication. It's not about relativism. Right? The reason why this is so important is that sometimes people people begin to talk about these voices and they get into the space of what? Relativism. No. The problem is that some voices have not been at the table in the first place. So we need to talk about it. Some voices have not been at the table in the first place. And that's why we need to talk about it. Authentication of that voice. It's not about relativism. Right? It's not about relativism. It's to have that space to talk about that voice and experience in that. And then the discourse of quick Vanessa talked about earlier on, the discourse of radical inclusion. Right? Because there's a very liberal notion of inclusion. Right? That we talk about inclusion as beginning anew. Beginning anew. Right? The problem is this. How do you hope to accomplish change? By adding to what already exists. When that which already exists is the source of the problem in the first place. That which already exists is the source of the problem, and you want to add to that. What are you doing? You're reproducing that. So we want to begin anew. Well, that's what we should talk about. Radical inclusion. So when we talk about inclusion, so just simply add what already exists. You're only reproducing the problem. Because it's the source of the problem that you're talking about. So begin anew. Right? So radical inclusion will work with multiple models of social justice. that sometimes it's made to teach everyone the same, which is ideal, but it's not the only model. There are more models of social justice. One is to target differential responses to recognize that there is no universal learner. Again, this one came out. And then what Jan Simpson talks about in terms of issues around the policies and acts of refusal. These are very, very important, the acts of refusal. That we go beyond accommodations of the different others. Many of us, our approach to social justice is about accommodating the different others. It has to be more, right? It has to bring anti-colonial configurations of power and the everyday rewards of resistance. How many of us reward resistance? We must begin to reward resistance. That's what I'm speaking about. We want to talk about this, about doing the difference. That somebody's coming to our spaces to resist because they don't find themselves in those spaces. And we must reward them when they resist, rather than punish them for their resistance. So how do we begin to reward resistance in that context? And how do we extend beyond the liberal pluralism and even the structural pluralism to what Nancy Fraser talked about, which is the new politics of redistribution in terms of the value groups and access to society resources, sharing in that. But to me, I think it's more than really that. It's this last point, and the good chat is good about that, which is to challenge our colonial investments. We need to challenge our colonial investments. We are all deeply invested, and we need to challenge our colonial investments. That means doing a radical way. We are all implicated in that. I want to end with just throw my ideas in terms of institutional strategies for achieving education and inclusion. I know many of us are doing this in our own spaces. Of course, there's one it talks about the institutional policy. How do you look at the possibilities of having policies in place that address all these issues? So developing an institutional policy to achieve inclusivity in the radical sense that I spoke about, right? Which you talk about in terms of that definition of education curriculum with clear guidelines, well-defined equity standards, timelines, expectations, and measures of accountability. On these measures of accountability, in Toronto, for example, you go into schools and you ask, oh, everybody will show you, we have an equity policy. They will flag it, yes, we have an equity. But nobody is held accountable when what is in the policy is not being met. So it has to be marked. You can't just simply show it as far and it becomes a flagship, right? You have to deal with the question of accountability. And the critical approaches to inclusivity, which is framed within anti-racist, anti-black racism, indigenous, anti-Islamophobic, and xenophobic perspectives. I think to me that is having that policy that has the eye and the angle towards these issues, and the clear communication of such policies and the applications. I think it's very important. This may be difficult, but I think Toronto is moving around that. Mandates for faculty certification. There are discussions around that. People resist that about academic freedom. Teachers, schools should be free to do what they want to do. No, but if you want, we are serious about addressing issues of equity, if we have to talk about mandates. What are faculties of education have to do? So in Toronto, we begin to talk about mandatory courses for future teachers and student teachers on Black, African, Indigenous education, anti-Black racism, anti-racism, equity studies before certification. And also selection of teacher candidates for training to proportionally reflect student population demographics. There is something immoral when students don't see teachers who look like them in front of them. And we have to deal with this. You cannot just say, no, we just want the best teacher. You cannot just say simply the best teacher. When especially in that you know excellency it looks like you. Right? You're more likely to say that teacher is excellent if you are there. They play golf with you, they speak like you, they dress like you. Right? So we need to address this issue, which is to say there's something ethically. We talk about ethics here, right? That there's something wrong when students don't see teachers who also look like them. I think we need to. Then, of course, the second one is putting in place specific equity initiatives, such as developing academic programs that are not strictly subjected to economic arguments and rationalizations of demand and supply. And David Thiel Goldberg in his book, Racist Culture, spoke about it. We talk about it as consumer-directed discrimination. So when you ask our institutions, why don't you have these courses? And they tell you, well, do you think people will come? Do you think we have students who will come into this course? Well, create them, and the students will come. Right? when some of us went to Odyssey, we didn't have this process on race and so forth. But when we started teaching them, our classes are filled. Students came and see the face of the institutions changing. Right? Because earlier they didn't see them as speaking to them, so they find them as staying places. So create a little cap, build a little cap. So it's not just simply a supply and demand issue. Integrating indigenous literatures and minority scholars into school curriculum, also promoting annual and periodic curriculum reviews, and then developing proactive strategies for faculty, staff recruitment, and retention. I'm really told to just wrap up. So, and then counter mission of education, right? Counter mission of education to me is creating these alternative schools or counter schools. And in Toronto, some of us are very known for pushing Afrocentric schools and indigenous schools. And then creating this healthy, specialized-centered learning spaces for education to proceed. And then in terms of methodology and pedagogy, they are best described the curriculum through infusion of multiple teaching methodologies, indigenous pedagogies and equity courses, the application of indigenous initiatives to support critical understandings of indigenous colonial settlement and national issues, and consideration of more dialogic curriculum creation involving educators, students, parents, and local communities. And my last bit, which is to say, deal with the certain Eurocentric evaluation methods. We need to work with variety, what is the place of variety in our schools. Not limiting tests to simply academic projects, but also community-based events as we assess our students, and as encouraging our students to present non-traditional papers as opportunities to be creative and to think outside the box. We need to deal with some issues of that. So two concluding thoughts, right? One is, I think we always need to guard against what I call the dangers of reading counter and oppositional discourses as necessary. Nothing that I've said here is diminished. All what I'm saying is that there has to be a set for new features. And that this set for new features will have to work with that. Something else, something different is possible. We are not stuck with what we have. If you are committed, you work with this idea of something different is possible, then we need to be able to. And finally, that we need to create or need to have that agency of nurturing what I call the political epistemic community. Sometimes we have that epistemic community or we have the political community. I want them to combine a political epistemic community in order to actualize some of these things. Thank you.
Questions or comments, so please feel free to ask.
Yeah.
The first is about when you talked about students' academic advancement in relation to their, for example, social relations. Do you think that, I don't, correct me if I misunderstood you, that this is related to the technical way of how the students, how teachers have to prepare the service education, where there is lots of focus on technicalities, on, let's say, academic advancements? There are less sessions given to value education, to moral education, to these kinds of ethics that actually really those students, teachers need to be prepared well as teachers for the job. And once they go to the job, even the in-service teacher education is even missing these kinds. When they give teachers lots of in-service training or pedagogy or blah, blah, blah. But still, these kinds of morals and ethics are missing. And I think this is not only in the very top centralized education system where I come from, but even when I read a lot in the decentralized education system, still the same, more focus on international competitiveness, these kinds of things. Very less attention is given to value and moral education.
No, precisely that's what I'm talking about. And I think I'm taking it to the higher level of analysis. I was also looking at it in terms of the competition, right, where, to give you an example, and I'm sure most of us will share this as educators. You'll be in your office and you look at, oh, George, I have this great idea, but I'm afraid to share it because somebody is going to steal it. right? Because you want to be the one to the high marks. You want to get the A's and right. Well, growing up, and I always say this, growing up in Ghana, right? Those of us who were seen as code smart, we got our kick by helping those who were not seen as smart. That's how we were respected. That's why, oh yeah, let's go to intelligent part. Let's go to for and that. But in where I'm coming from, the current system where I'm operating, those who are smart want to keep to themselves, because they want to be the ones with the A classes. And that is what I'm talking about in terms of. Yeah.
And then in this case, what do you think might be the role of teachers as intellectuals, either in the pre-service context and the in-service context? Both teachers and teacher educators are in. What role can they play? What can you be your recommendations in this regard?
I think to me it's the power. I believe in the power of ideas to bring about change. I believe in the power of ideas to bring about change. As educators, we are trained to work with the power of ideas. So whatever idea we get, how do we translate that to make a difference in people's lives? And I think an educator has to be a voice of difference.
Exactly.
Every educator must be a voice of difference. And the voice of difference means you want to bring about change. Right? You want to disable. You want to disturb the peace. Right? And I think that to me is that being that voice of difference and effective in very important. Yeah.
We don't yet know a lot about how this group might turn into a project.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in how some of the things we've been talking about might be reflected on how the project develops. Because it's one thing to talk about how systems out there function, but I look around, we are privileged, aren't we?
Yeah.
So, as a privileged group, how does the project get the voices on? How do you use the term and disturb the peace?
Yeah.
That could be a project that builds something and also allows for disturbance.
You see, I was look and do something I didn't take it. I think it's very important for us to also recognize some of the successes. Right? I think look, when we critique, it doesn't mean that there hasn't been successes. So to me, to come back to this one, I've always agreed that the problem with privilege is not because it's not relevant. I think it's what you do with it. That is the issue. So it's like power. The discretionary use of power is a problem. Right? So we may have a dean, we may have a principal. That position itself, what they do with it is the relevant thing. So how do we do, what we do with our position, which means looking at wherever we are. What are we going to do to make a difference, create something which is different from what is currently taking place? Because we do recognize that there's a problem and we want to address it. So how can we couch design a project, something which is going to basically undercut how things are working now? I mean, that's how I think that. I may not be able to give a concrete answer to that. Having that prism is very, very important. Because those have to do how we put certain projects into place. In other words, how is this project going to be different? Given that if we continue to do what we've been doing, right, it hasn't led to the same. So something which is different, which is going to be subversive. This is going to be subversive of what we have. I think to me it's about courage. Having that courage. Right? Research, decolonial research is about courage. It's about courage. To do something different when you know that. We're going to ruffle feathers. People are going to get mad. Right? But this is not going to be over a cup of tea. Right? If you think you can bring about change over a cup of tea, it will happen a long time.
Okay, that's 1 minute left.
How do we locate authenticity in a project of decolonization if previous ideas about authenticity have been colonized?
Yes, good question. Excellent question. I always say this, but I will take back what authenticity should mean. Right? There has been Western liberal conception of authenticity, which is about assigning discursive authority, authorial control to certain bodies. Right? And when I talk about that notion of the self-contained voice, I was speaking about that certain voices haven't been at the table in the first place, although they have been on the menu. They haven't been on the table. But the issues that are being talked about. So to me, I want to talk about authenticity, which is also about reclaiming, right? It's about reclaiming. It's not about something which is not contaminated or pure. No. I want to move away from that. The purity and the non-contamination. I want to move away. But it's about using authenticity in a way that allows certain voices and certain issues to come to the table. So when we look at, say, African discourse, right? We have people who have been assigned discursive authority to speak on Africa. Right? It's like that we know us more than we know ourselves. Right? And that to me is so insulting. You know me more than I know myself. So I want to have authenticity in a way that says, wait a minute, there's something to that absented voice. That is very legitimate for it to be heard, for it to be accounted for, and to be brought into the discussion. And that's how I want to use it. So, to me, to disentangle the very problematic understanding of authenticity and bring new meanings to that, which allows certain voices to be at the table, certain voices to be heard. And let me end with this because I think one of the is it Shinji Adichie, the power of the single story. Yes, I want to look at trouble in the way she troubles it, but I also want to be careful because so George comes into the room here, and George starts to disrupt. And they say, oh, but George, you are just one. I can know that you are representative of, say, the black or the African voice. Well, that voice is also important. That voice is important as a disruption. Because the narrative cannot continue the way it is going on. You don't have that intervention, right? Nothing necessarily arguing the nuances to that. That there is also a way to discuss the authorial control, the discursive authority that has been assigned to certain bodies who claim to know about others more than others know themselves. And to me, this is very important in that process. Trying to survey.
Thank you very
If you have any quick thoughts that you want to jot down on some sticky notes on your way out, please do.